Good day, good morning, good evening, everyone. This is Dennis Santare from Proudfoot. This is our global webinar on emerging technologies in aviation supply chain. As the attendees start piling on, welcome aboard, everyone. I'll go through a brief introduction and then introduce our panelists for today. First of all, my name is Dennis Santare. I'm a managing director at Proudfoot. I help run the firm and specialize in the industrials practice in the Americas. My background is in aerospace, particularly aerospace operations and maintenance. I did some time as sales and strategy executive for different MROs in North America before joining Proudfoot. Been with the firm for about a year. I joined Proudfoot because of our focus on two things. One, delivering tangible results for our clients through operations transformation. And second, and probably more importantly, how we focus on behaviors and people and getting people to change the way they do work at the point where the work gets done. And we work side by side with our clients. We've been doing that for 73 years since our founder, Alec Proudfoot, founded us back in 1946. We really pride ourselves on being on the shop floors, out in the hangars, in the factories, again, working through our clients and with our clients to deliver real operational transformation. And why we're looking at this, emerging technologies, is technology is a piece of what we do in terms of getting operation transformation to be successful. It's part of that people, processes, and tools equation. And it's important as consultants, and of course it's important for our clients and executives that we work with to understand, what is the emerging technology? What are the applications of them? Are things like big data truly transformative, and do we have our heads and hands around what that does for our businesses? Really, in basic terms, how do we monetize these technologies and get them to help us execute our day-to-day business better and execute on our strategic plans? That's typically why we take a hard look and a deep look at emerging technologies, and also why we're doing this webinar. I think, as the people transformation, as the operations transformations experts, we love to look out and look to new technological breakthroughs and other companies who specialize in the technological aspects of transformation and the hardware and the software, if you will, behind those breakthroughs. And bring that thought to bear in a holistic way for our clients. So we wanted to do this webinar to get more opinions, get more thought leadership together, and give our clients and our colleagues out there across the globe access to some of our emerging thought leaders and emerging technological leaders that we're associated with at Proudfoot. So that's the sort of background and why we're doing this. And the next piece is just to kind of introduce our panelists. First off, we have Jonathan Parkinson. Jonathan is at Air Canada Cargo. He's leading the IT department for Air Canada Cargo. He's a cargo systems expert with more than 8 years at Air Canada. And he's an expert in systems integration. And working with Jonathan, I think he's one of the few people I've met that have a real handle on the complexities behind trying to get disparate IT systems to come together and give a business a tip-to-tail look at a tip-to-tail visibility to the people working in the business. It's a challenge when you're working with disparate tools that have been deployed over different time horizons, and I've been really impressed with how Jonathan and his team handles that. So Jonathan, if you could take a minute and sort of give us a quick perspective on your background and what you bring to the table for the webinar.
Thanks, Dennis, and thanks for having me. So again, Jonathan Parkinson, I lead IT at Air Canada Cargo. I come from a different background than aviation. I actually started my career in the financial industry as an IT PM running large-scale programs. And when I decided to switch industries and join the aviation industry, a lot of people came to me and were wondering, why would I leave an industry that was really on the forefront of technology to go into an industry which was really on the legacy side of it? And I think I saw it as an opportunity to be part of a team that really, changes the past, unwinds the complexity, and plans the roadmap for the future. Air Canada has always been regarded worldwide in the industry as an innovator in technology, different ways of doing things, better ways of doing things, and really bringing together the people, the process, and the technology.
Thank you, Jonathan. Appreciate that, and welcome aboard. Next up, Dr. Nick Miesen from JUGAAD Advanced Analytics. Dr. Nick Miesen is an analytics expert. He's got 10 plus years of experience in aerospace, chemicals, and hang on, I've got to move your video, and CPG, sorry. He's got a doctorate in aerospace engineering, which I find really exciting and attractive as an aerospace guy. Dr. Nick, can you give us some perspective on your background and what you bring to the table, please?
Thanks, Dennis. It is exciting to have a PhD, I can tell you. No, just kidding. So I have a background in physics, where I have a master's degree, and did a part-time PhD in aerospace engineering. What I bring to the table is, I think, the experience from various industries, where I'm happy to starting to get to a conclusion where it almost doesn't matter which kind of product are you making. If you're creating an aircraft, if you're producing chemicals, or if you're actually producing beer. I worked for Heineken, AkzoNobel as a chemical company, and making aircraft. The funny thing is, once you start understanding data, what you can do with it, it doesn't really matter which industry you're in. And I'm hope to bring that generalist view to the table on one hand. On the other hand, and together with my co-founder Mayank, he will introduce himself, we're always trying to squeeze everything out of the data that there is. There's always raw data, but we need to create information from it. And we can do that with statistics, but we can do that with way more advanced technologies that are available.
Fantastic. Thank you, Nick. Next up, as Nick alluded to, Dr. Mayank Gupta. Mayank is an expert in modeling and predictive analytics. He's got expertise in maintenance, supply chain, and manufacturing, and also has a PhD in aerospace engineering. Again, very exciting. Something I would love to do if I had two lives. Dr. Gupta, can you give us sort of your background and a perspective on what you bring to the table?
Thanks, Dennis, for the introduction. My background is mechanical engineering with bachelor's, and then in my master's I went to aerospace engineering, then continued a full-time PhD in aerospace engineering, where I was working with modeling, damage detection, and prediction in the aircraft wings, which is used in Airbus A380. During that time, I realized the potential of big data and using causality along with the power of processing big amounts of data, and what value that could bring to the industry. In the last 3 years, since we started the company together along with Nick, we've been working with clients, and we find there's a lot of work, a lot of value in the big data, which can be exploited with the right kind of team and expertise brought together in the same room. So my core expertise with big data and emerging tech in aviation would be doing the heavy lifting of the data. So basically heavy lift the data to get the information out of it, and value, most importantly.
Fantastic, thank you. And then last but certainly not least, Dr. James Kerry. Dr. James Kerry is the chief scientist and imaging expert at SiOnyx LLC, also the founder or a founder of the company. He's got a Harvard PhD, which we won't hold against him. It's in applied physics. And he's been a tech entrepreneur for quite some time now, and has led a very exciting career, which I've observed from afar. Welcome aboard, Jim, and could you give us your background and perspective?
All right, thanks, Dennis. Yeah, my background is as a technologist. Studied physics or applied physics in grad school and got a PhD. Based on that work, started a company called SiOnyx. The goal of that company is to make image sensors and cameras that see at night better than any other product out there. So basically improving digital night vision. There's a lot of applications in big industries for that, including aviation and aerospace. And I think the perspective that I bring is lessons learned and just the experience of being a sort of a smaller player with a new technology and trying to introduce that into markets that are well established and aren't as fast moving as a startup usually likes to be.
Fantastic. Appreciate that. Thanks all for your quick backgrounds and perspectives. We could go all day back and forth. I've got my own personal questions I would love to ask. I do have a few conversation starters, but right now for the audience, we've got 35 participants, which is a great number. Thank you all for joining. I hope you get as much out of this as I will. The way to ask questions is at the bottom of your screen. If you mouse over, you'll see a toggle for a Q&A. Click that Q&A button, submit a question, and after we go through the first initial 3 questions, one for each of the panelists, or I should say team, we will go through each of your questions in hopefully the order that they were presented. So it could be a follow-up question to one of these intro questions, or it could be your own. Please don't be shy. The webinar's purpose is for you all, the U35 folks, to interact with our team of panelists. So if you have any challenges to that or issues, either send me a quick or send a quick question or comment. And if we can't get to you during the webinar, send us a note. My email address, I think, will pop up relatively quickly. Send me a note, and I'll get the question to the right panelists, and they can answer after the webinar. So without further ado, Jonathan, you're first up. The question is a bit of a general one, but specific to air cargo. What technology or technologies do you see as having the most impact on air cargo over the next 1 to 5 years?
Thanks, Dennis. So let me start with this. I've been pretty lucky to be active in the industry with IATA, especially in the last 2 years, speaking at both the digital conference yearly in Geneva and recently at the World Cargo Symposium in Singapore. And one of the big problems in the industry in general is really the lack of transparency of information. It's very siloed, it's very broken apart. And when you look at all the players from the beginning to the end on the supply chain and really map out that journey map, every customer touch point, every partner, we really as an industry have a challenge of sharing this information, number one, and number two, the speed at which we do so. So I think from an industry perspective, we're looking for everything that we can do to help be really great at information. And if you look in the world today, and we talk about, IoT, when we talk about AI, Air Canada is heavily invested in both of those things. But from a cargo perspective, air cargo, and I'll safely say, is probably 25 years behind the passenger side. So we have a lot of legacy systems. We have a lot of old messaging types. And if there's nerds out there, and I say cargo, or XML messaging, that's being talked about as, something that we have to do when in fact it's something that's 20 years old. So anything that's IoT that can help get the information in, how can we make better decisions? How can we share the information in real time amongst all stakeholders? And then how can we use AI to learn and just really see what the data tells us and get better at what we do?
Thank you, Jonathan. Yeah, I think from my own experience with airlines, and you used the word first, so I'll use it. The nerds tend to gravitate towards marketing and inventory and revenue management, right? That's where a lot of the heavy lifting analytics happens. That's where a lot of the math happens. It would be great if the airlines took a more holistic view of the nerd stream, if you will, or the recruiting stream for folks that are gifted in those areas and funnel them into maintenance and air cargo and other operational sectors of the airline. I think they would benefit greatly from taking a harder look at how they recruit. Yes, revenue management's fun and exciting and the math is cool, but the math and analytics are also cool in operations as well, especially in air cargo. So yeah, good luck. I think, part of it's recruiting and part of it is what you're doing, which is keeping an eye on the emerging technologies that are impacting the sector.
So I think one of the things, just to quickly add, to enable all of these things is we really need a solid digital platform. And if we look outside of the aviation industry, which I think is healthy to do from time to time, you look at companies like Netflix and Amazon, and you look at, the platform that they've already created, which really enables, speed to market, ease of use, transparency of information. They can open up to all the marketplaces that they want to, almost at a push of a button. So imagine sitting around the table and just saying, what cool thing do we want to do next? That's where we're working towards. And I think at the same time is really enabling everything that we can do to focus on the customer, the partner, and the employees. And I'll add that, we don't often talk about how emerging technology will impact employees. And I give an example all the time of how a 2-year-old today can pick up an iPad and just instinctively know how to use it.
Mm-hmm.
You can order off Amazon in a click of a button and have it delivered to your house either same day or the day after. These kids today will be working in 15 years,
right?
They'll be leading in 20. So what world do we have to start preparing, for that future workforce to come in, I think is essential when we talk about digital platform.
Absolutely. That kid's going to want to ship a box on Air Canada tails at a push of a button and not have to fill out any forms, not have to, maybe even pack the box and him or herself. Just it happens, and Air Canada Digital takes care of it. So exciting times, but definitely something to prepare for as this next generation hits the market. Okay, I'll move into predictive analytics with JUGAAD and Nick and Mayank. What is the most important thing that airlines and MROs need to know at this point in time in order to make the leap into fully utilizing all of the data they have at their disposal to improve efficiencies in their supply chains? It's a mouthful, but I think you know where we're going with predictive. So maybe you can elaborate a bit on that question.
Shall I kick off, Mayank? I think it's good to have a perspective from somebody. So I'm working as an interim manager now for KLM Air France. So knowing the actual content on the situation, also how the data is, how the quality of the data is, and only can be completely in line what Jonathan says on Air Canada and the cargo side. It's basically the same in. Here in Europe, unfortunately, I have to say, and there are so many reasons why they tell us, well, the data is there because legislation this, or there is data over there because, well, that's a machine we bought in 19 something and it's still there. So data is scattered all over the place, and that is a big hurdle. Although there is a lot of data. Yeah, let's assume that once you would have gathered that with IoT techniques and move into the cloud, that would be my advice. But I think what they should know, and I'm looking from the change perspective, is that advanced analytics, predictive analytics, it's not magic. It's a lot of hard work, and people need to start realizing that. And I'm getting passionate about it because it's also something we run into as a startup. Also when I was a manager in other companies, crunching the data is a lot of cleaning the data, understanding the data. The actual magic, so the algorithm, that's just the last bit. People really think sometimes it's just a plug and play situation, which is not. So if they need to know something, A, advanced analytics, it's a lot of hard work. B, it's not magic.
To add to that, Nick, and to answer a part of Dennis's question, that what are the companies currently taking steps to move forward with utilizing the data? One of our clients is actually using the pilot complaint feedback, which is normally in the past put away in trash. They are actually using that as a source of information to see when is their part ready to be replaced. No fancy apps to monitor that, no fancy smartphones, no cloud systems, just simple analog complaints which have been logged properly in their database. So yes, there is a backlog of legacy systems. These were heavy investments back in the 70s and 80s. They cannot replace it with the click of a finger, but they are also looking to the future by making small steps at the other end, which could be moved faster.
Yeah, for sure. I would echo what you just said with, I was an aviator at one point, and I also worked in a facility that repaired aircraft components. And there was absolutely a disconnect between what the pilot had written or had originally thought was wrong with the aircraft or system and what we were dealing with in the shop. We very rarely would get that initial gripe and that initial data. And it was frustrating because you lose that chain of from a reliability perspective. You don't get that initial perspective on why the thing failed. You have to run through your diagnostics and your tests, and potentially you're replacing parts or scrapping out expensive components. Whereas if you had the initial thoughts from the pilot and potentially something from the mechanic, you might be able to piece together a better story. And then if you take it to the next level where you're doing some of what you just described, analyzing the text, linking the text to the actual reliability data, such as mean time between failure, et cetera, now you're getting a much more healthy look at that failure mode. And you can be making a lot better decisions in terms of cost and turnaround time and resourcing to get that part or that aircraft or that system back online.
Yeah, that's the final objective, hopefully achieved.
For sure. And, one area where I would suggest, for airline clients and colleagues, what I always tell them is, hey, start with your little data first, and this is in line with Proudfoot's thinking on behavior and process and people, start working with the data that you have, make smart decisions about reliability based on what you're seeing in your data. Your components will come off. They almost always will have the time of failure, how many flight hours, how many cycles, et cetera. Use that to make smart decisions about how often you replace that component. Perhaps you remove that component earlier than necessary because you're saving it from a catastrophic failure or a safety of flight issue. Very few airlines I know are taking that step even with their little data. So, for me to get started on the journey towards what is really predictive analytics and predictive maintenance, taking that first step is really important, and doing that with, in quote unquote, little data. Would you agree? Or, yeah, Nick.
If I can build upon that, I fully agree with one additional note. Keep in mind that it needs to be scalable. Sometimes I see starting small is really good because you can test things, you can start building it, but sometimes I'm seeing a lot of experiments being stuck on the fact that it's not scalable. And that's something that shouldn't hold you back starting, but it's something to keep in mind for the end goal, right? It's what I'm seeing more and more is that we're starting a lot of experiments and we're not able to scale it up. And so I fully agree with you with just one note. Keep it in the back of your mind that try to find a scalable solution, because that would even be a bigger efficiency hit.
Fantastic. Totally agree. Thank you, Nick. Last questions for Jim. Broadly speaking, what do you see as the biggest challenges to market players as far as getting disruptive, leading-edge technologies to reach a more widespread, or to reach or achieve widespread adoption?
I think probably the biggest challenge, or the biggest miss in expectations, is the timing. So I'd characterize our company as a hardware startup, and as an entrepreneur, I would, in my early years, thought that you would just come with a technology and show it to the right people. It's cheaper, it's better, and boom, off you go. Often, what you're trying to do is get your technology into big markets like aviation, automotive, et cetera. But they're almost completely incompatible with the timeline or the life cycle of a startup. What I've learned is it really comes down to relationship building. You have to meet people 3, 4, 5 times, show them what you've got, convince them that you're actually legitimate, and then don't expect that your first interaction or program is going to be huge. It's just too big of a risk for someone. Like in our case, for instance, we make cameras or image sensors. They're a component, but oftentimes they're at the front end of a more complicated system, like in a drone or a plane. There's so much invested in that system and testing and reliability that overcoming those challenges and overcoming, let's say, the not invented here mentality of the engineers that you're going to interact with really takes a long time. One of the things that's been successful for us is to aim at a smaller engagement to begin with. That's just easier for everybody. Writing a smaller check is easy. You get to know each other, you get to prove yourself, and over time build those relationships that allow your technology to be adopted. And then also, as a small company, you don't have the scale that's necessary in the beginning to work with larger corporations. So you have to almost grow into that space as you go along in those relationships. But I would say, so it's difficult, it's long. I mean, you're talking like 10, 15-year time cycles to get something that you had in hand into the systems at the beginning. But once you do have those relationships established, and once you do have the trust, those relationships are long lasting. And like, for instance, for our company, those relationships are a backbone to what we do. They allow us to innovate off of our platforms because we know that they're there. We know that the customer is happy, and we know that those relationships will be there for a while.
That's great advice, Jim. Thanks. Fantastic. Not an entrepreneur myself. I like to think entrepreneurially, as most people who are in consulting do. But one thing that, as you were speaking about relationship building and starting small, first of all, I totally agree. If you go to some of the aerospace conferences that we attend, there are people out there with emerging technologies, and I think a lot of them are trying to think too big, and they're looking for that big sale and that big initial burst onto the market. In my mind, I'm thinking, if I was an entrepreneur, the worry about starting small for me would be there's some person in a garage somewhere building the same technology, and it's a race to get it out there, right, and get it patented and get it sold and get penetrated. So how do you kind of balance the need to beat the competition if there is one or two, versus keeping it small so that you do kind of build and scale and verify and please your investors and all the other things you have to do?
Yeah, it's difficult. And actually, that last point you said, pleasing the investors, that's the tough part, right? Like, they're expecting everything to take off in a year or two, and
right.
You tell them that's not gonna happen. It's gonna take a decade. That's a difficult pill to swallow.
Sure.
All those things are important. I mean, you do have to protect the technology. You have to be out there quickly. It is the balance. I think. Again, that it comes back to relationships. I was under the expectation that we had a technology, it solved a problem. There were people out there looking for the solution, or even writing solicitations, for instance, like from the aerospace industry, they often ask for technology solutions. I'd read a solicitation and say, oh, that we can do that, so let's submit and we'll win. And in fact, what happened is somebody has been talking to that program manager for 2 years to bring up that problem, and they've already got that relationship established, and they're more likely to win than even maybe the better technology. So
right.
It's tough. It takes luck. It also takes perseverance. And there's no magic bullet, but you kind of have to cover all those bases. You have to be out in front of people as much as possible. But be ready to work hard and long.
Yeah, I think you've hit the nail on the head, and probably what keeps a lot of folks out of that game. One challenge we've seen specific to aerospace is the need to get past the regulatory hurdles, right, and to get an Airbus, a Boeing, an Embraer to sign off on your technology if it's going to touch one of the airplanes that they have the type certification for. If it's going to be used in maintenance or operations, and it's going to interact with the airframe. I'm sure Jonathan's seen some of this, getting that listed as an authorized form of technology by the OEM, by the aircraft OEM, is a huge barrier to entry behind you. And if you can get that going, similar to Uncle Sam, right? If you can get Uncle Sam's stamp of approval on something, then it really helps you scale. Good luck. I don't envy that hard work that you're putting in.
You know what, Dennis? Let me just add to that quick, if you don't mind. So with IATA on the Cargo Operations Technology Board, one of the mandates, somebody had said before that people are building things in their basement. They're doing that. They're going to continue to do that. It's going to go faster. One of the things IATA wants to do is to really try and standardize and get the requirements up front so people can build to a standard. We always have to have it certified on our aircraft. Recently, we were working with a company on a pilot project for Bluetooth Low Energy, but it does happen. If it's built to the standard at the beginning, that saves a lot of time, and it really comes down to how many things can you try, how many things can you play with, and just to find that right recipe of what works for you.
Thank you, Jonathan. Great point. Okay, we'll go to the attendees. We're coming up on 11:30 East Coast time, and we'd like to end around 11:45. So I'll get through some of the questions, and perhaps there'll be more as we go through. The first one's from Jerry. I think this one's targeted at JUGAAD. It's regarding big data in the area of maintenance reliability. Source data accuracy seems to be a big challenge. How do you overcome the lack of reliable, accurate source data?
There are quite a few tricks to do this. First is what we have done in the past is basically build it from engineering principles, find the outliers, and present it back to the client. This looks a little unreliable. It's how you want to build a relationship with them. So some clients can take it straightforward. Okay, this is fishy data going on. This does not make sense at all. And basically, this is the first steps we always do. It's like cleaning the data to find where the information does not make general rationale or sense. So that is how we detect, one way of detecting incorrect data. The other approach which we take to the extreme is, okay, let's assume everything is correct, build something out of it. And if the model is false, tell the client that your data is absolutely being falsified by finding where the falsification lies. Because as data scientists, it becomes a moral duty to present facts with data. So you can easily say this data is not making sense. If you say this is the correct data, then you need to go and check your sources who are giving you this data, which is not happening correctly then. So it's both approaches have to be taken both ways.
If I may add to that, maybe a third one. I think what is underestimated is sometimes the time that it takes discussing the fact that we do not have enough data or that the data is incorrect. That time can also be used just to gather new data, to install some simple data gathering systems and work with that. Sometimes it's we take too much time talking about it and less doing.
Great point. And in a recent client engagement, we had some challenges matching shipments to the financials, and we just decided let's go to shipping and just count boxes for a bit and just see what where the discrepancies are. And by doing that, you can not only help identify the discrepancies, but you can sort of help mock up the data capture tool, because you're sitting there literally counting boxes and counting outputs. So I agree with you. I have a bias for action as well, Nick, and so sometimes we spend too much time cleaning and not enough time actually doing. So that's a great point.
Yeah, the problem there maybe is just what's sexier, working with IoT or just counting boxes. Sometimes it's just that problem.
Sure. For sure. A lot of folks are looking for that technology to help, and there's a manual solution sometimes. And then, like we say at Proudfoot, humanize, optimize, digitize. Right? First humanize it, then optimize the process and the approach and the behaviors, then digitize it, and then by digitizing it, you can pull that work out and apply that labor and that effort somewhere else where a tool or a piece of hardware can take over. So humanize first, then optimize, then digitize. This one's from David.
Dennis,
sorry, go ahead, Jonathan.
Sorry, can I just quickly add to that one?
Absolutely.
In the air cargo industry, we have tons of paper worldwide, and it just seems that we can't get away from it. And I think when we talk about trust in source data, I say all the time, IT doesn't invent data. So we've got a lot of employees that are keying things in. We've got a lot of customers showing up with paper. So really getting, either a barcode scan or using OCR and trying to get it in as accurately as possible, I think we'll avoid a downstream impact as well.
Fantastic. Thank you, Jonathan. This one came in, let me get this right because I'm getting chat and QA at the same time. This is from Mark Gilliland through David. It is, I think it's good for sort of all the panelists to think about how are businesses in the aviation supply chain leveraging open APIs, and what new operational capabilities could being part of the connected enterprise bring? Maybe we'll start with Jim on that one and then go around.
All right, is on mute? Yeah, I mean, for us, I mean, maybe it's not exactly what the question was addressed at, but open APIs for image analysis is a huge part of what's going on right now. There are, it's called artificial intelligence, to lump it in there. There's so much of that going on in every industry, including image sensors in general. I know that we're leveraging it. I know a ton of people are leveraging it. You sort of have this tremendous, so it used to be, I won't go too far, but the image sensor was everything before. And I'm seeing in the last few years now, it's the pipeline behind the image sensor and using those APIs and just being smart about it. It's probably the next big wave, if you will, going from, picture capture to picture processing to sensing instead of viewing. It's huge.
Yeah, I totally agree. Some of the stuff that they're doing military-wise in imaging and just in security, it's just fascinating what they're able to pull off. Heard the other day that we may start seeing skin cancer checks via AI, and the benefit there is you're going to be looking at something, maybe a growth that is evolving over years, and the AI is going to be able to determine at what point it becomes a problem. Interesting applications, and I think with APIs and being able to integrate that with software is a huge technological breakthrough for that particular space. Jonathan, would you like to address? You deal with APIs almost daily, right?
Absolutely, and you know what? We're really at the beginning of the journey. I think part of our digital strategy that's a huge part of our digital strategy. And if I use the example I just did about getting rid of paper, you can't sweep your hand and get rid of all paper, but you can change what you can. So when we start talking about opening up APIs, and we're looking at it operationally, we're looking at it commercially, there's players out there that want to change now, that we can. We don't have to wait for everyone to be ready. And I think just starting that journey and making it easier to talk to each other is the right way to go. And if I use Apple as an example, Apple's really the best example I have. They open everything up. They say, here's our stuff. Play around with it. In fact, this weekend at the hackathon in Madrid, they've got a One Record API that they're opening up, and every airline and companies come in and they play with it and they try to make something of it. So I think we hear a lot of buzzwords in IT in the industry. I don't think this is one, but it's one that it's not. You don't just press a button and it magically happens. As someone else used that example, it takes a lot of work, and there's players out there that are eager to start now.
Thank you, Jonathan. The next one is definitely we'll get UGAAD going first because it's on IoT. It's from Marie Berner. It says, following up on Jonathan's response, getting on the IoT bandwagon is often talked about among the MROs, the maintenance, repair, operations folks that I meet with. They don't know who to grapple with the challenge due to many players in their supply chain. For example, in a recent meeting with a MRO player, they're setting up a panel to assess the challenges. I'd like to hear from any of the panelists if they've seen any of the MROs begin the process of implementing big data, and if so, please provide some feedback. So let's go with UGAAD first.
From the top of my head, in the aviation MROs, I'm not aware about any organization which has started to implement big data. There are a lot of pilot projects going on, and they're all being done offline, tested to see what's going to come out from it. I'm aware that in the marine industry, Maersk, the Danish company, they have started to implement live big data using open APIs for weather forecasting in the ships to do the MROs. Maersk is doing it, but in the aviation industry, I'm not aware. Nick, are you aware about anything?
Well, I know that within KLM Air France, there are a lot of activities, but the real big scale up, no, not yet. It's indeed a lot of the experimenting. What Lufthansa is doing, I'm actually not completely aware. I can imagine that. I know they're a little bit further down the road, so if they're ready a step further on this part, I'm not sure. But you do see that the digital part, KLM has a dedicated digital studio, and you see that the passenger services get a little bit more attention on the whole digital realm than the MRO bit. So I haven't seen that much yet, and I think it's also because a lot of enablers need to address before you really can go to the big data stuff.
And just to add to that, I just remembered now that Airbus has started to build the platforms. They basically have their own platform to track their own components provided to different suppliers. So like different airliners, that's what they've done. so they can give more maintenance and repair before the airlines themselves know if they require it. So the platform is live.
Yeah, absolutely. Just a quick anecdote. What I've seen in the market, it wasn't an airline, it wasn't an MRO, an aerospace MRO. It was an airline. They adopted Airbus's data and IoT tool called Skywise, right? And Skywise is an aftermarket solution that can be installed on an aircraft to gather data through sensors and relay that data back to a maintenance department, so that and an operations center at the airline to make fast, real-time decisions about when to put an aircraft down for maintenance. A system may not have failed. A system may just be failing. The sensors are putting together information in a holistic picture around, mean time between failure, current variables, whether it's, temperature, vibration, strain, etc., on different components within the aircraft. And the airline that I've talked to, which I won't name, but they're one of the early adopters of Skywise. They're getting great results. The gentleman I talked to said that they've done maintenance which has absolutely prevented a delay and a cancellation and cancellations within their system. And they're not a large airline, so you can imagine what something like that could do for an airline of the size of American Airlines or British Airways. Very powerful stuff, and not necessarily all that complex to install and to use, especially if it's giving them actionable advice around when to put an aircraft down a little bit longer for maintenance, or informing them that aircraft 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 is overnighting in Las Vegas for an extra 5 hours. Let's pull this pump because the pump is telling the sensors that it's it's going to fail on the next flight or during the next week of flights. So that's where I've seen really great adoption. For the MROs, I think it then becomes a matter of who owns the data and how to access that data when those aircraft and those components are coming in for maintenance. I think the deeper the relationship an MRO can have with an airline or military operator, et cetera, the better. If they can get access to that data either real time or in a dump to make better decisions about how to maintain the aircraft or the components, the better. But it's a little more difficult for the MROs than it is for the airlines to get that access. Jonathan, would you care to comment on that?
Not really on the MRO piece. I can follow up offline after the fact, though. But I will say that the new aircraft coming in are generating, for lack of better terms, a ton of data. Right? You're talking, you're collecting. It's unbelievable the amount of data that these planes are generating, and the potential is there to just send so much. And I'd say on the cargo side, we're playing with the Bluetooth low energy devices, and although we're using it to track certain things, rolling stock, some shipments, documents, bags that fly with flights, I see a broader potential of them. You can easily tag these things under something as simple as, for maintenance checks, life vests. Imagine 400 seats on an airplane. You can walk on and just say seat 23G and 17A are due, instead of having to physically check each one. So sky's the limit on this one, I think.
Absolutely. Totally a incredibly powerful use case and value proposition right there. So we're at the original deadline. I think we've got some really good questions. If you don't mind, panelists, if you can stay on for another 5 or 10 minutes, we still have a good number of participants. Just a couple of quick follow-ups here. This one's squarely for Jim. For the panel, what do you think is the biggest risk to new technology adoption today? In other words, what are the top reasons companies resist technology adoption?
From the perspective of the person getting rejected, it's really hard for people to take risk, especially in an industry like aviation, where the downside so much worse than the upside of an improved system. I think that's probably what I see as the biggest risk, is just in general being risk averse. Technology is wonderful. Technology is romantic in some way, and you feel like you make everything better. But you really have to prove the technology for a long time, I think, before it gets adopted in aviation.
Okay, so have a value proposition that's long-term, understand the deal cycle is a long-term deal cycle, and that risk is probably the key reason why they're not saying yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Jonathan, so I'm going to flip the table. So you're the buyer of technology for your organization. What are the top reasons you resist technology adoption?
So right now, I can tell you that on any given day, anyone, there's so much out there, and I think what we wanted to do is take a step back and before looking at IT dollars, what's the process? What's the problem we're trying to solve? How can technology help? And again, going back to starting with the process, I've been asked, I don't know how many times in the past 8 years to automate something, and my answer was, automate what? If you start with the process, if you optimize the process, you see then where technology can help. That helps narrow the field down a bit. And then I'd add the change management component to it. I think that's often underestimated. When we do introduce it, again, to talk about employees, how do we get it into the operation so that it becomes habitual, natural? How do we make sure that we use, all of what we've purchased and get full value of? So I think it's an appreciation for a few things.
Got it. Thanks. I'm going to skip UGAAD on that one and go into one of the more controversial questions we've received is there's a lot of talk about the Boeing 737 MAX, right? And all the issues it's had recently. This aircraft is an upgrade of a previous design, which added more efficient engines as well as a lighter airframe in terms of lighter airframe surfaces. So it actually had a lot of new technology and exciting technology within the aircraft, even though it was just an extension of a previous build. What are the pitfalls of updating designs versus a clean sheet? Maybe we go with Nick. You start first as an aerospace PhD, then Mayank, and then we'll get the other panelists in.
Whew, that's a big question to kick off with. I was still in my thinking process, but the first thing that pops into mind is when you have a clean sheet, it's obviously the cost that is involved, and the question is always: is there such a big need to get that cost approved and budgeted? That's the first thing that comes to mind. I need to think on this. It's a difficult one, right? I think every situation has probably its own solution. So, but that's the first thing that comes to mind.
Okay. What do you think, Mayank? What are the trade-offs?
I think continuing on Nick's discussion, I think you are asking, you're basically overhauling an entire organization. Because you're looking at the frame structures of an aircraft, which are properly coming out of molds of old times, if I'm looking at the structure frame. So you're asking that to be developed, which means the supplier who made that frame or the mold has to start thinking again, which is from a clean sheet design, that costs a lot of money. And you do not know if it's a fail-safe design to fly or not. We have seen, like, going back to the previous question, if we see about risk adoption, we are marketed that SpaceX is going to the moon, it's so cheap, but we are not told the stories of how many crashes happened. And especially with the Virgin Galactic of Richard Branson. So the issue is, what do we take? Marketing, like, what is sexier? Marketing, it's working cheaper, or we make it risk-free and then fly. So we know something that has been happening for 70 years. We can still iterate it further. If we want to start a clean sheet process, we can keep it in the drawing lab and gradually take steps, like small steps again. Because otherwise we could be losing human lives. We're talking human lives. We cannot take a pit stop mid-flight. We cannot take a pit stop to repair something.
Yeah,
that's interesting, and that's obviously also the safety perspective. The other thing that comes into mind is the whole marketing business case. If I take the A380 from Airbus as an example, where everybody was banking on the fact we needed these huge aircrafts because, well, that was the new future. Well, right. That was quite of a risk, right? In the time showed us it's not the perfect solution for the situation that the world is going to. So you take such a big risk with the question if you're going to make the money back that you put in.
Yeah. Yeah, and coming to the example of A380, airports didn't have the runways to host them, or they had to redo thinking.
Or the
On top of
gates.
that,
Yeah, the gates, the ramps.
but it had great technology again, new materials.
Absolutely.
It's interesting. It's an interesting discussion.
And it does set us also, if you look at the consequences on a financial level, because aircrafts are not bought, they're leased.
Yep.
Right. Yeah.
Exactly.
I think for me that if you take a new design versus an existing design upgrade, if there are design check hurdles, operational testing hurdles, validation shakeout type hurdles that you skip because of it's a design extension and not a new design, then that might be the trade-offs to analyze most closely. So if I'm not saying that anyone skipped something because they were just lazy or they just didn't want to invest the cost, but if there are specific things that you do with a new design, especially in aerospace, that you would not do in a major upgrade, like a Max or a Neo or something like that, then that should be carefully looked at. Maybe Jim, what's your sort of take as someone who's developing new technology? What are the trade-offs between you're given a use case potentially by the U.S. government for your existing optics, and it's something that you're wrestling with? Should I modify my existing product or should I start new? What are some of the trade-offs you go through?
Well, I mean, the pain is real, right? So we have a commercial product that we have out, and the development cycle for that. You had to make some compromises about what you put in based on economics decisions. And what's amazing to me is now changing anything on that is really a difficult decision. You have to go through all the, it's not on the same scale by any means, and lives aren't on the line, but economically making any change requires you going through all of those checks again that you already went through. And that's a tough decision. And in the case of Boeing, maybe, and I don't know where it'll play out, but maybe it wasn't economic. Maybe just relying on an older system and upgrading it was motivated by safety or economics. Who knows? But good intentions. But it may have been a case where relying on those old systems was a mistake. But it's hard. It's really hard. And just things like qualifications and certifications. Just going through all that again for us is a very difficult decision to make, even for a small change.
Sorry, Alf, handling the mute button. All right, Jonathan, anything to add real quick on that one before the final question?
No, just I think when we look at our application landscape and our roadmap, I mean, we're often faced with having, just outside of the subject, but in general, changing systems, upgrading them, buying new. Looking at the long-term plan of, basically answering the question, what do you want to look like in 5 years, and trying to build something that will remain, add value now, and easily integrate into the future. And, wanting to avoid that, technical debt term where you end up with a spider web of complexity. So I think always have that end state vision in mind. But like everything, it's all about managing risk, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. There's so many constraints to wrestle with. I don't envy those kinds of decisions where you're maybe not betting the company, or maybe in Jim, your case, you are betting the company on a decision to start over or to just upgrade what you have. Economics, cost, risk, your manpower, your capabilities, those sorts of things. Those are tough calls. That we help our clients with those kinds of calls all the time, but it's never done with the gut. It's always done with data and good planning and good foresight. Last one is from Andrew. It's around manpower utilization, something that Proudfoot we hold near and dear to our heart. With World Productivity Day coming up, it's something we're celebrating. We really focus heavily on productivity, and we've done so since our founding, where our founder emphasized and brought to the market the concepts around short interval control and active management. So how can IT help? How can IT help improve manpower utilization? or quantify workload and allocate correct manpower in advance, instead of, daily looking at, who do I have available and sticking in crass terms bodies against problems, rather than looking at manpower workload, and where can I put the best application of my resources against the workload, and is it the right workload, and really trading off those utilization factors and the work efficiency against what I have to actually, no kidding, just get done that day. Should we look at what the question here? One of the questions is, should we look at the workload first, then allocate the manpower? How can IT help us do that? And how can IT help us be a little more deliberate in how we plan and schedule our work? That's kind of an open question. Maybe Jonathan, you go first, and then because just in Toronto alone, you're dealing with over 400 people trying to make things happen in a cargo space. So maybe you start us off with that one.
Thanks. Yeah, so Toronto's a great example, Dennis. 65% of all of the freight that we ship worldwide at one point and the other touches that building. And I think it comes down to information. If a plane leaves London, we know it's going to land in Toronto 7 hours later. We know what's on the plane. Can we take that information? Can we put it into a warehouse management system that can help not only plan the manpower, but also, the floor space? It gets so busy in that warehouse, every square inch of that floor space ends up being coveted real estate. So when does it have to be stored? When is the ideal time for it to be brought down to the floor, to be broken down and prepared to shipment? Reverse is true too. So I think definitely information. And we're really hoping with our a new warehouse management system that it can help introduce some logic and maybe use predictive analytics to help us with that.
Great segue. I was going to ask Nick, what do you think in terms of, does predictive have a play here in terms of scheduling people?
Sorry, didn't see the mute. Yeah, it's of course, yes, it is. It's exactly the same thing with predicting when packages come in, repairs can be planned, people can be allocated. But it all starts with having the data up in order to start predicting. Once you have the data, the predicting part is easy. That's at least my idea of it. And so yeah, predictive can help, but I think it's the step of gathering the data and getting the right data in order.
Thanks, Nick. Mayank or Jim, anything to add to that? We're right up against it.
Yeah, no.
Okay.
No.
Fair enough. First of all, to the panelists, thank you very much for joining us. We've got some great perspectives from you today. Kind of a wide spectrum of questions and opportunities for the discussion, and really appreciate your thoughts and your insights. I think we got a good level of insight and a good breadth of insight. Andrew just thanked us for that answer, so I appreciate that. He's looking at a real-time problem right now. So I think a lot of our participants are dealing with these kinds of challenges literally today. So I think we gave him a great set of insights, and that was the overall purpose of the webinar. So thank you for your participation. Thank you, participants, for joining us today. We've recorded it, obviously, so this is totally available. If anyone has a question that they did not get to ask, or a follow-up question, please send me an email at dsantare@proudfoot.com. Any parting thoughts from the panelists? Going once?
Well, I'm not sure. You emphasized that yeah, the group is more focused on aviation. For me, most answers, and I think I started off with that the discussion. For me, most answers are applicable not only to aviation but to a wider industry who is acting in the MRO business.
That's a fantastic point. Okay, thank you, everyone. Appreciate your time, and hope to see you out there soon. Have a good day.
All right. Enjoy your day. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.